This is a short video on how the power sword currently functions in terms of its damage profile and also a general guide on how it is best used. We have received 3 buffs for the power sword since patch 6.2 and now 7.1. Only took them 7 months, but here we are, and I do not miss 7.0 power sword. In patch 6.2, the power sword received a 5% buff to its base damage, and a series of damage buffs to its power mode attack. The former is, as expected, hardly a buff. The latter is a little more interesting, and we now know it is how Saber was testing the water. Before we first discuss the buffs, we need to understand what motion value means. Motion value is a modifier that is used to change the base damage of a weapon during an attack. For example, if a weapon has 100 base damage, a 1.2 motion value would mean an attack does 120 damage. The buffs per the patch note was a 10% damage increase to the first power mode light, 20% to the second, and 30% to the third. Previously, it always did 100% of the base damage. We have to understand that the base damage of the power sword is rather unremarkable for any of the relic versions. For comparison, the block relic knife does 18 damage, while the balanced power sword only does 16.8. The artificer block power sword has 19.425 damage, but we don't talk about that weapon here. The block relic power sword had a base damage of 14. This means each power mode light attack was only doing 14 damage. For reference, a Minotaur's enemy has 44 HP on Ruthless and above. Yes, a base power sword needed at least 4 light swings to kill a Hormigond. Patch 6.2 increased its base damage to 14.7. While this change itself would have made the block power sword take 1 less swing to kill, it's ultimately inconsequential, as the weapon perks would have easily crossed the breakpoint. All I'm trying to say here is the damage buff matters very little. As for the improved motion value on power mode lights, we see the combo damage change from 14, 14, 14 to 16.17, 17.64, and 19.11. In combination with certain perks, you can see how power sword in power mode can easily cross the 22 damage breakpoint to allow for 2 shots on Minotaur's enemies. This was an okay change, but again not very significant. As for Majora's enemies, this benefit was not as pronounced. Going from 22 slashes to something like 17 slashes to kill a warrior is hardly an accomplishment. Even if we were being generous with the parry bonus, this is still a ridiculous 12 slashes down from 15. Needless to say, the 6.2 buffs were fairly inconsequential. In patch 7.1, the only buffs made to the power sword were the motion value changes to the power rake and power world attack. These are the heavy attack and the unique timed attack. The motion value for power rake went from 1.8 to 2.5. For power whirl, this changed from 2 plus 2 to 4 plus 4. You can understand this as an additional 70% damage boost to power rake, and a whopping 400% additional damage to the total damage of power whirl. With the block power sword, our base damage for power rake went from 26.46 to 36.75, while power whirl went from 29.4 per hit to a staggering 58.8 per hit. For reference, the direct hit of a relic block chainsword shoulder bash does 18.05 times 3.1 equals 55.955 damage. So what makes the power sword a good option compared to the almighty chainsword? We know by just looking at the motion value that the power sword doesn't have anywhere close to the same raw damage and burst damage the chainsword has. The chainsword's base damage and light attack motion values are also significantly higher than the power sword's. The heavy attacks are no different, and that's before we take into account of the full throttle cancel tech. What's special about the power sword is how it has an answer for pretty much any situation, but you have to be very active. The chainsword is comparatively simple, and you can use it pretty much in the same manner whether you're dueling or fighting a horde. You can think of it as a hammer. The power sword is more precise. Speed and power modes are fairly straightforward at a first glance. Dueling a single enemy? Speed mode. Need to make some room for yourself in a horde? Power mode. Still, there's always more nuance. When you're on speed style, your sprint attack gains an additional forward moving wave attack that travels 10 meters ahead of you. This increased range allows you to reap the benefits of any sprint attack, i.e. increased stagger, but from a significantly farther distance. As far as I know, very few melee weapons have access to such a long range attack this rapidly. While the damage isn't anything to write home about, you can still interrupt reinforcement calls or gain a gun strike from either an incapped Majoris or Minoris. Power mode turns your strikes into white arcs that have increased cleave. Cleave simply means how many enemies any given attack can hit. Your attacks are slower, but also gain increased stagger against Minoris enemies, able to send them flying. This also allows you to quickly gunstrike Minoris enemies. In addition, the third power mode Light Slash also gains an additional 10 meter wave that travels in a narrow line. The damage is only half the base damage. The fourth power mode Light Attack unlocked via the weapon perk also shares the same property. A very cool mechanic that I was briefly aware of but didn't really learn until the making of this video is what I've dubbed the Step Switch Tech. This maneuver allows the user to quickly switch between the two modes by either forward or backstepping and holding the melee button. There is a timing to be learned here and could take some getting used to. The result is that you're now able to seamlessly access the sprint attack of the other attack mode and immediately continue your combo with the new mode without having to awkwardly stop your attack just to switch mode. This also triggers perks that are activated when switching stances. There are some other ways you can switch stances, such as using the bulwark shield or using a parry cancel. Personally, I don't think it gets any better than the step switch. Let's talk about Power Rake. Power Rake was always the safest and most efficient way to deal damage with the power sword. You have access to this heavy attack regardless of the current mode. What's special about this attack is that it has a 10 meter range via its shockwave, with no damage drop off whatsoever. This extends the power sword range by quite a significant margin, though its tracking can be unreliable at times. Power rakes can be done twice consecutively, but you're not put into a slow recovery and can continue your light attacks with minimal chain time. If you so wish, you can loop power rakes infinitely by mixing a light attack in between. Finally, we have Power Whirl. This attack can be performed after either a light or heavy attack, by waiting for the sword to glow and pressing the melee button. Your Astartes will perform a spinning attack and plunge down with his sword. This attack has a ludicrously high base cleave value of 20 enemies, and the plunge attack has an AoE radius of 5 meters. With the increased damage buff, this is now one of the most devastating attacks that can be performed this quickly. Power Whirl is not considered a heavy or charge attack, so perks like Overcharge will not affect it. In conclusion, the Power Sword is a very competent weapon that offers many nuances and requires situation awareness to maximize. I still think the Chainsword is overall a bit better, even without the full throttle cancel, and in that end, the Power Sword should probably receive a motion value buff to its speed style as well. The user already has to manually change the stance to maximize its effects, so why not make its damage profile more fitting for single targets as well? I've seen many sticking to only the power mode because it doesn't seem like the single target damage differs that much between the modes, but speed style is indeed the superior option in a duel because you attack so much more quickly. Increasing the damage on speed style will further cement this function. I would say give each of the combo an additional 10% modifier, so it is a little closer to the Chainsword but still lower burst damage in general. Anyway, that's it on the Power Sword. Hope you enjoyed this and see you next time.